Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Sean James, owner of dotado apparel. This is another video installment that is a part of the blog series that I am working on. This topic is something I've kept close to home and did not want to express or to make, but I feel like it's pertinent to the climate that we're in, and also what other people may be experiencing in their own aspect of life. And this topic is depression. And for me, what I'll try to do is kind of keep this brief, but I'll talk to how I came to be aware of depression, like what I feel has contributed to my depression, and how I'm managing and what resources that I've found to be helpful. Um, so with that, I'll kind of give some context to myself. Grew up with a loving family, grew up in a loving family, two-parent household, two siblings. Um, both sides of my family, paternal and maternal, were loving. The experiences that I had as a child were typical middle-class African-American kid, with the exception of me probably being a unexceptional kid or exceptional kid in the aspect of I was very creative. From a very young age, I just took a admiration and had this great appreciation for art. Anything that involved color, drawing, painting, um, tinkering with things. So anything that involved kind of creating something was something that I became passionate about and was very passionate about. Taking all of that into context, moving into life or even with peers, I always kind of felt myself, outside of the circle that I enjoyed, because not many people could do what I was doing. So I felt a little odd at times. But the fact that people admired it and liked it, it encouraged me. So I found kind of joy in creating. So everything about the process of creating became more of a full circle where I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that people enjoyed it, and just kind of kept that circle going. But as I got older, the dreaded question of what are you going to do when you get older, or what do you want to be when you get older, came into play. And whenever I would say art, people would shun that idea or like become dismissive to it and state, "You'll never make money as an artist. That's a kind of a profession of poverty, and you'll be miserable and unhappy." And me being the child that I was, I listened to my elders or people who are older than me, and that took a little chunk out of my life. But again, I still found art to be a great tool and an asset to cope with frustration, anger, and whatever negative emotions that would pop up as a typical kid. But again, desiring to still follow that path and make the most of what my abilities were, because everything was self-taught and really didn't have the resources around me to tell me how to get better, but was blessed that in moments God would put me in connection with people who were artists or better than me as an artist, and I would be able to glean information and help develop and progress in that light. But as I got older, I wanted to, go to or attend schooling that helped push me further. And in my attempts to get into these institutions, I was denied. And in those denials, it just made me feel less of an artist, or my aspirations of becoming an artist or even growing to be better as an artist diminished. And me trying to cope with that, I still needed art as a form of coping. So with those rejections, I still would draw just to kind of make myself feel better in the state of living with those denials and rejections. And going into high school, again, found pleasure in art by doing caricatures for people. Excuse me, caricatures and drawings and things of that nature, to the point where it didn't completely diminish the desire. And again, the question of what do you want to do with your life would come up And as I was going through high school, that question became more heavy for me. And on assessing that art probably wasn't going to make me any money or a life that I can sustain for myself and possibly a future family that I had always kind of envisioned as a young man. And with that, started looking at other alternatives. And what I found as an alternative was architecture. And in my pursuit of wanting to learn about architecture, I would, find, who was an architect and a famous architect, and would basically absorb all their artwork, or their work, and recreate it freehand on basically in the sketch pad. So eventually I developed this whole catalog of images of layout designs of future houses and buildings that I wanted to create when I got older. And again, going further down the path, I would go apply to schools who had architecture programs and was denied. And that like totally crushed that aspiration, and not having a support system around that part of my life and redirecting me or helping me refocus, I became more reserved and lost passion for like my ability or potential. And at this time, I started using track as a way of dealing with some of my issues. So the physical exertion of track and training, while painful, was kind of substituting the pain of rejection, but seeing like a net result in that pain and frustration. And plus, it was enhancing a natural gift of mine, which was athletics or running. So the two kind of work hand in hand. But again, art never fully left my life. I just pushed it further down, the expectation of it being a source of joy in my life. It was just more or less a tool of coping and getting by. Once leaving high school, I attended a university in Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota. This school is a predominant school in Minnesota, predominantly white, wealthy, conservative institution, but at the time it was allowing a pipeline of students from New Orleans to attend as a way of integrating, or let's call it integrated, it's probably a bad term, but exposing young African American men who were looking to put themselves into a different environment to potentially grow and experience a different aspect of life into this environment. And while it was well-intentioned, and it's still a well-intentioned program, it really lost sight of the actual experience of what these students were dealing with. And myself in particular was this paradigm shift of the South and North. And where racism was kind of overt and understood, it was more masked and hidden in this northern aspect of racism. But again, something I'm grateful for, and I'm happy that I experienced it. And in this experience, I became depressed because again, it was miles away from home. Really didn't have to, I didn't have like a point of resource to help cope, other than the other African American young men that I was in school with which I formed this brotherhood, and we managed ourselves very well, considering it all. But even with that, there were some insights that we weren't aware of, but we did a good job of managing amongst each other. But again, myself being, I guess, empath or more sensitive to a degree, personally speaking, I reverted to isolation to be able to kind of try to understand what was going on, or just to avoid having to deal with the pain. And again, using art as this tool of coping. And again, small circle of friends within the institution that were from my hometown admired the art, always congratulated me, and encouraging me to keep doing it. But again, it was always a tool of just coping with depression, rejection, and disappointment. It was never a thing that I used to like just I felt joy in doing it. It was a coping mechanism. And at this point in my life, I was confused as to, like, ever seeing anything that I do as it relates to art being fruitful or something that means anything. And since architecture and art kind of became a diminished thing, I looked for the next best thing that could fit my ambition or my desire. And that happened to be journalism. And because journalism spoke to the humanitarian, the activist, and just the overall personality that I have, a person of truth, loyalty, and honor and respect. And I loved all the ethos things that were are traditionally connected to journalism. Just the accuracy of the story, the unbiased, projection of a story, and again, being creative with words, which was something that I had also done as a young child. I enjoyed words and reading, not so much all types of books, but certain things would intrigue me. Philosophy was one of those things. But again, not having a true outlet, I became more aggressive in school. Professors noticed it. One particular professor noticed it. And he also noticed that I would doodle in class as he would give his lectures. And occasionally I would leave those in class. Either they would fall out or sometimes they would just be tossed in the trash and he would pick it out. And on one occasion, he pulled me after class and was like, I noticed that, your participation in class is a little off. I'm seeing that you're doodling in class or drawing in class, and, rather than, chastise you for it, I want to see how I can help you. And at that moment, I felt someone was looking at me and I was being seen, which inspired me. It just made me feel like, okay, I was a part of something, or someone noticed me, and that was so important, and I can't explain the words to it. So with that, he suggested that I become a cartoonist for the newspaper. Again, not really having faith in, like, my art. One, wondering if people even really cared, or who really reads reads the editorial cartoons. And again, I was always a fan of comics and all those things, so for me it was intriguing, and I took joy in it. So unwillingly but willingly did it, and did a few editorial cartoons throughout the year, and most of the perspective of those cartoons were from a person of color attending a white university, but also kind of navigating those small situations where, from the perspective of a white student, they typically will overlook it because of their personal experience, and not having to, one, take into account the possible point of view of the other person. And it was a dynamic or a paradigm that, again, I was truly, like, taken aback by, just because I'm an empath, and I always speak to people from that perspective. One, I make sure I speak from my truth, but also am aware that this person may be taking it from their perspective. So I'm always kind of like putting myself in their shoes as I'm communicating. And again, that's after I speak my truth. And from that point, if there's a discourse, I have a place to speak from in agreement with their objection. And hopefully in speaking my truth, there's an understanding. And again, conversation can go on or it can end, but again, I'm getting off topic. So with me doing the cartoons, I had developed a awareness that people were paying attention because they were causing people to feel uncomfortable. And in part, I guess it must have struck a nerve because they were seeing the truth of the projection of how I was seeing the white community at the university. And as the cartoons kind of were in circulation, my identity became known, and people would then, almost in a sense, kind of ostracize me, or I felt ostracized, or I felt, this sense of like a distance or a gap, but also there were people that would point out things in my art that to me were hurtful in the context of an artist, but not as an individual. And it was, my signature was a gang tag, or it looks like it's some kind of gang affiliated tagging, and had no clue what that meant. But again, it was the understanding of, again, how a person that is in opposition or different from the society can be painted in a light based on something as trivial as a name, and people kind of gather in agreement around it, but completely miss the context of what the art was about. And again, it kind of worked itself out through time. I just kept making the art. My tenure had ended at the newspaper 2 years later, and again after the tenure, I was kind of felt like the work I did was like it got noticed, but it felt like it was more of a thing of contention and frustration for the people who were viewing it. But for me, it was a release, and it fit in the narrative of what art was for me, and it was that, just a complete release and coping mechanism. So probably 2 years after that experience, or my time at the newspaper, incoming editor came in and had reached out to me about 2 awards that were granted or awarded me, and asked if I was aware of it, because they were in the office and they assumed that I had left them there, or again, whatever. They just wanted to make sure they got into my hands. Once it was known that I was completely unaware of it, my receiving the awards, I can tell on the phone, by the pause in the editor's voice, how kind of, I guess, disappointed they were, but almost kind of like this, like sympathy for me. And in that pause, I felt that same sympathy, because again, I always felt my work wasn't valued, and to know that it had been valued. And the 2 awards, one was for like a national, I think either it was second place in the national and first place. So it was the second and first place, and transposed the the national and the regional, either or, they exceeded the expectation, or me getting the awards exceeded the expectation of what I thought my work was. So in that moment, I reflected on, one, how my art was seen at that level, but the other part was that I didn't, or wasn't acknowledged, or didn't get information that had happened. So the potential of my life changing upon knowing that versus not knowing it hurt, because again, had I known at that time, my life I would have personally taken a stronger approach and tried to develop that skill and leverage those awards to move myself forward. There's life experience, and in the assessment of everything, depression set in probably at that time at the heaviest, because again, it was this collective disappointment, this collective, almost rejection, levels of rejection that had just compiled. And again, everything that I wanted to do just felt like it wasn't there for me. Journalism had lost its luster, because I noticed at that time media was very deceptive in even portrayal of African Americans, and that was a voice that I wanted to speak in and speak to, and kind of did this collective like fast forward of me in that space, and how infuriating that would make me, and not knowing, if my nature could allow myself to be in a space where I'm speaking in a voice that's not fully mine, or having to have an editor, affirm my work. So just let it go, and just gave up hope on it. And at this point, the degree for journalism was just to get the degree, and there was no expectation past that point. And all of that left me even more depressed because, again, I had this great love of art, passion, and I know my abilities were above and beyond for someone who wasn't trained. So it just, everything just collapsed on itself. And at that point, suicide kind of came into play. And through the blessings or the grace of God, I was kind of given as a young child, immersion into the Bible and, church. And I don't want to, say everyone has to have that, but some belief system is very crucial. Um, and with that, it helped me a lot to cope and manage. And again, fast forward, you know, getting married, um, finding a job that did support my creative ability in the gaming industry was monumental, and definitely something that I can say kind of changed the trajectory of my life. But my collective experiences kept me from seeking more out of fear of rejection. So once I got into that space, I excelled at the level like I was at, and was so afraid to like step to the next level because I just didn't want the pain of being rejected. And again, it was a great place to be, but hindsight 2020, it's something that, again, is a direct reflection of the impact of depression and, these bad moments that happen and how we tend to let that paralyze us. So with all of that, when things got good working in the game industry, where everything kind of really collapsed is when I was laid off from this particular job after 15 years. And at this point, I had lost hope because at this point in my life or in my career, again, being an African American male, trying to get into other creative spaces just felt like a chore. And I had done some contract work, and it felt like I was fighting to be a part or fighting to prove my work and the validation of my work on top of being, just me being myself. But knowing that people were like fighting to accept my color or fighting to, kind of like, I don't want to say fighting, but feeling like they had to adjust to like this new perspective versus this homogenous environment that they were in. So again, all this added to my depression. I'd become like really like down, and at this point, suicide had actually been like on the table, like the pictures, the process, the letters, everything was put into place and formulated, and just waiting for that ideal time. And again, I had a daughter that, and a son, again, married, and the concern or the fear of like, how my action would impact their lives did play a role into, me not fulfilling or going through with things. But the fact that I had gotten to that point was so soul crushing that I had, lost my way. And I'm trying to think, there was a friend who reached out and noticed it, and them telling me that I needed to explore therapy was, something that they felt might be an option. I was in complete like denial of that because again, I felt like I was the master of my own body and space that was not required. But the more I tried to fight things or do things on my own, I kept falling down and kept, failing in the aspect of getting better. And eventually found a therapist that I connected with. And in that process, I failed because I walked in with the mindset of I'm just going to give this person what they need to hear and what I want them to hear. And after like 2 or 3 visits, I had realized like you can't build any kind of trust or any relationship based on lies. And that ultimately required me having to pause and apologize to the therapist and start from ground zero. And in that process, I realized, like, despite this person being a complete stranger, their insight into mental health and their constant engaging of my statements that I would give forced me to like dig deeper. And in this process of me going to therapy allowed me to like stop and start asking the questions of why. And once I learned, like, that process, it helped me to go back to the beginning where the environment I realized was a factor. My experience with rejection, my experiences with disappointment, my not pushing past those things by allowing myself to get into the space of pursuing higher levels despite it all. So with that, depression, became this thing where it's, as long as it took for me to get here, I had a better understanding, and in that understanding, it gave me a strength that I can't explain. But I do, like I said, want to acknowledge that it required me being humble and vulnerable in the times of my weakness, and allowing people who saw me to speak to me, and to speak to me genuinely for the concern of me. So that meant allowing people to say, like, man, you're not, that's not, like, you're not doing this, or you're not doing that, or like, is everything okay? And allowing people to feel okay with asking me if it's okay. So if I had anything to like share with any, one dealing with depression, it's the allowing yourself to be accountable is probably the most detrimental thing to it. And I don't know if accountable is the right word, but I guess more or less vulnerable to accepting that the events in your life may have caused or potential triggers. And unless you unpack those things and have someone ask, and one, you sharing those experiences, or just sharing the entire experience, to allow a trained professional to pick the things that could potentially be these triggers to help you guide you down the path of self-discovery and addressing the things that we tend to create these negative narratives around things that really aren't important. And I say that for myself because that has been the most of the context of my life as it relates to depression. I created narratives that didn't exist despite seeing the counter in the smaller experiences. The smaller experience being family and friends admiring my art, strangers admiring my art, but me allowing what I would call the home run, me missing the home run hit with getting accepted into a school or getting a job, and those events to negate everything else. You have to keep pushing things, past that point, and keep doing the work. And again, the more information you can get helps you out, and you just have to keep driving to the state of being happy and finding joy in life. And the more you can do that, the better off you will be, and you will stave depression off, and it will become a further distant thing. And I can't say that it will be completely gone, but from the perspective of where I am, it does get further away, and life becomes more manageable. And also in that work, making sure that you keep negativity away from you. So if there's things that you find bring you down, either people, other people's situations, people bringing situations to you, that you learn to set boundaries to keep those things away, and make people understand that you need the energy of happiness and joy for your well-being. And again, it's not to be dismissive or pushing people away who have problems. It could be an opportunity to instruct that person, to help guide that person to find the help that they need. But again, it's, you have to kind of manage that space and that paradigm for yourself. So with that, You know, depression is something that's, you know, definitely treatable. It's manageable. Life does exist afterwards, and it requires the work. That's all I can say. It requires the work, and I'm saying that with this understanding that I've lost a friend to suicide, and in that there's always kind of this guilt in that process, and or in that event, that despite me being far away, like what could I have done? And I think that also impacted me on how I feel about, like, you know, my depression, and the aspect of, you know, I don't hold judgment for his actions and his choice. I do like have regret that possibly, you know, like I didn't have the opportunity, or I missed something that I could have like been that voice to help him engage, or help him find the focus in the direction that he needed. But everything happens for a reason, and that process, you know, again, or that event has opened my eyes to, like, you know, how I move forward. And with that, it requires the work. You just have to put in the work. You have to be vulnerable. You have to ask for help, and trust that people are like there for you, and you trust those people that are close to you and that love you, and that's the biggest key to it all. So with that, just want to say thank you for watching the video. God bless. Be well. Dare to live every day. Visit the website Dotado Apparel. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Dotado Apparel. And again, peace and love you.